People, what is your hottest and most random intimate encounter? Something you still think about today? I was staying at a hotel in Cancun for vacation, and it was Christmas night. After having dinner with my parents, we went to the karaoke room, where a bunch of guests were singing, drinking, and socializing. There were two Russian girls, one blonde and one brunette, singing a lively Russian song at their table, but they were by themselves. Everyone was impressed by their beauty and energy. After a couple of drinks, I managed to get up and sing Hotel California. It was a lot of fun, and the Russian girls smiled at me and invited me to join them at their table. Of course, I said yes. My dad must have realized what was going on and decided to take my mom back to the room, leaving me with the girls. We spent some time talking, then smoked a few cigarettes together. They told me they were both cheerleaders, one for CSK in Russia and the other for a US NBA team, though I can't remember which one. As the night went on, the drinks kept flowing, and we were all getting pretty drunk. They asked for vodka, so I joined in to impress them. Time passed quickly, and soon we were all tipsy. We decided to take a late-night swim in the hotel's pool, even though a storm was approaching, making the wind shake the trees around us. Before heading to the pool, I went to their room and waited while they changed into swimsuits. The blonde girl led me to the pool, and we started swimming and chatting. I was totally captivated by her, and before I knew it, we kissed. It felt surreal, and I was thinking, is this really happening? She even mentioned that her boyfriend had sent her to Cancun so he could party without her. It didn't seem like the healthiest relationship. After some time in the pool, she decided it was time to head back to their room. She was hungry, and the brunette was waiting for us. They spoke in Russian, so I had no idea what they were planning. When we got near the room, the blonde told me that they were leaving for Russia the next morning, and they only had a few hours left in Cancun. That was a bit of a surprise. We went into their room, and the hot tub was ready with the brunette inside. I couldn't believe what was happening. I snapped a few hidden pictures of them in towels before my phone died, then joined them in the hot tub while we waited for food. It turned out to be the best night of my life. Completely unexpected, as I hadn't even known these girls were around until that night, their last night in Cancun. It was, without a doubt, the best Christmas gift I could have received. Story 2. I had a random encounter at the Craven Country Jamboree, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a country music festival. It's a huge event with thousands of people drinking and just having a good time. Lots of party energy, so it's wise to be careful. My favorite story happened one morning around 6 a.m. I woke up still pretty hammered from the night before and absolutely had to piss. I stepped out of our campsite, completely bare, and two girls walked by, shouting, "Nice dong." I gave them a quick helicopter spin and went about my business. Later that day, around noon, those same two girls came back, and we ended up chatting for a bit. One thing led to another, and we ended up having a drunken three-way in my camper. Craven definitely knows how to make things wild. Story 3. More lucky than random, but it's a long story with a lot of background. Essentially, my wife is bi and very open to three scores with women. We've never had the opportunity, but she was clear that she would do it in a heartbeat if she liked the girl too, and we became friends with a really cute, lipstick, lesbian couple. My wife and I partake every few months in pure Molly, and we asked them if they wanted to join us one weekend. One of them used to be an exotic dancer, big time into partying, bi, etc. The other was a gold star, never been with a guy, but had never taken it before but always wanted to try. So, we plan a weekend, they come over, and we all roll and have an amazing night, get very close after that. Texting/Snapchatting almost daily, etc. We made another Molly date with them, and the date was approaching, and I was in a particularly horrible mood that I wanted to cancel that weekend. My wife, sort of planting seeds early on, made a joke about, "Well, I guess I'll just have to tell my husband the four-way is off." Well, it turns out they took the bait. The girls talked about it, and frigging agreed to it with some ground rules. So the day comes, the Molly kicks in, and basically I end up banging everyone. Even the now no longer gold star. In fact, she was just enthralled with me. I'm particularly good looking and have been bodybuilding for 10 years. The Molly just made a switch go off and she was all over me. She'd never been attracted to guys, but Molly took away her inhibitions, this new toy. Basically like a Ferrari she'd never driven. For me, I wanted to give her the best first-time experience imaginable, and I almost viewed her like a never-driven '78 Mustang or something. We ended up doing it again the next weekend at a resort as one of the girls' friends was having a party at a resort. I offered to split a room with them, and basically we went to the party for 5 minutes, went to our room and took Molly, and then spent the evening, well, doing what we did the first time. Months have passed since then, and we haven't done anything like that again. The bi lesbian panicked, thinking it might be dangerous or that someone could develop feelings. But those nights are forever etched in my memory. I even took pictures because my guy friends never believed me. 4 girls at once. It's likely it'll happen again eventually. Life moves on, and as she realizes no one's gotten emotionally attached, it's bound to happen again. Every time was an amazing experience for everyone involved. The Gold Star actually thought it would become a regular thing for us and was surprised when her girlfriend decided to end it. They get to have their fun and then walk away, no strings attached. While I'm married and they're in a committed relationship, there was never any awkwardness. It all just felt strangely natural. The next day, once the fog lifted, no one felt weird or uncomfortable. Naturally, we don't talk as much anymore. For a while, it almost felt like we were dating, both of the girls, stepping carefully and hoping it might happen again. We keep in touch, but to be honest, after the girl pulled the plug, it definitely made my wife and I lose interest in pursuing anything further with them. We still try to meet up as friends every month or so, just to keep the connection alive, but scheduling is tricky. The girls usually work weekends, while we have them off, so it's a logistical challenge to find a time when we can all get together without someone working the next day. We're all open to it happening again, except for one girl, so I'm cautiously optimistic that it will eventually come together again. Those were some of the best nights of my life. For months after the second time, I was practically glowing, felt like a god lol. Story 4. There was this cute girl I met in my chemistry lab at university a couple years ago. She was pretty cute, and I was excited when she sat at the table across from me, and we were then in the same lab group. Later, like a couple months after we talked and got to know each other, I ran into her at the gym. I was in my loose gray sweatpants, and she was in some tight yoga shorts and sports bra. I saw her take a quick peek at my package before her eyes came up to meet mine. It was short but intense eye contact. I smirked and went to finish my lift. As I was doing some squats, I could see her staring at my bottom from the mirror as she walked by towards the locker room. After that said, I was done and started to walk to the locker room, which has an entrance right next to the women's. She was standing against the wall that separated the 2 doors. Next thing I know, she grabbed me by my shirt and just dragged me into the women's room. It was so frigging hot. We were all over each other kissing and bumping into all the lockers as we made our way to the shower. We went into the showers, and that's when it got really dirty. She let out a gasp as I slammed her against the wall with a single quick hand. She wasn't even wearing inners to the gym. We were getting busy and barely heard someone open the door. We got on the floor. Everybody walked the dinosaur. Story 5. This might sound like the plot of a cheesy movie, but this really happened about 6 years ago. I went camping with my friend's family in a cabin they rented in the woods, not far from where we lived, at a popular park. They were sharing a 4-bedroom cabin with his aunt and uncle, who brought along their 20-year-old daughter and her boyfriend. I had only met my friend's immediate family, so I didn't know much about the others. About 2 days into the trip, I ended up getting sick. Not seriously, but enough to feel weak, so I stayed back in the cabin most of the time. One morning, everyone decided to head out to a popular fishing spot about 30 minutes away, but I stayed behind, still feeling off. My friend's cousin, for some reason, also stayed behind. I think she was still asleep. The bathroom was connected to the living area of the cabin, so I came out and sat on the couch, listening to music. The cousin was already awake and using the shower, but I didn't think much of it. About 10 minutes after I got up, the bathroom door opened, and there she was, completely bare. She must have thought the cabin was empty and that I'd gone fishing with the rest of the family. When she saw me, her eyes went wide, and she quickly slammed the door. A minute later, she came out, wrapped in a towel, apologizing and explaining what had happened. Here's where it gets a little awkward. I, feeling a little bold, threw in a cringy comment. I said something like, "Well, at least you have a really nice body." Keep in mind, her boyfriend was also on the trip. She blushed, thanked me, and stood there for a second before dropping her towel. And well, one thing led to another, and the rest is history. Story 6. I was remodeling a house when one of the neighbors came over to borrow a tool. I lent her a pair of pliers, and she returned them about 30 minutes later. She then asked if I could give her a tour of the house to show her all the work I'd done. I was completely unaware and genuinely thought she just wanted to see the place. When we got to the master bathroom, she followed me in, then suddenly slammed the door behind us. I was wearing loose shorts, and before I knew it, she had my wand in her mouth in less than 15 seconds. We ended up banging right there in the bathroom. It happened so fast that I didn't even have time to process it. I had a girlfriend at the time, and cheating isn't something I usually do. To this day, it remains one of my most unexpected and bizarre experiences. There was no flirting, no foreplay. My wand just ended up in her mouth, and I didn't have time to think about it. Story 7. This happened at Craven, and anyone who's familiar with the festival might not be surprised. I got separated from the group I was camping with while watching the show and found myself stumbling back to camp, nearly blackout drunk, through the dark. After what felt like forever, I finally started recognizing some familiar cars and tents. When I returned to the campsite, I found one of my friends making out with a girl on the beer cooler, while unmistakable sounds of shagging were coming from the tent trailer. I was supposed to be sleeping on the outermost bed, but my other friend was with his girlfriend in the bed right next to mine. To get to my own bed, I did a sort of flying dive over them, but almost landed on someone else. There, in my bed, was my buddy's girlfriend's friend, mostly unclothed in the pitch-black darkness. We exchanged a few quick words before I, somewhat awkwardly, reached out and found what I can only describe as a pierced bare chest. I jokingly asked, "Are you not wearing anything?" And she replied, "Sure seems like it." Things escalated from there. In a strange twist, she turned out to be quite the Squirtle and, unfortunately, completely soaked the cushions of my bed. Since then, I've bumped into her a few times, and she's actually a really nice person. Story 8. I had a wrong number at 2 o'clock in the morning. Girl sounded sexy, so I called her back. We banged 2 days later. One night, I was out at the pool hall with some friends when I ran into a couple of girls I had met at a party a while back. I invited them back to my apartment to keep the party going, and they said they were down, but they needed to stop somewhere else first. We exchanged numbers, and I went back to playing pool with my friends while we waited for them to show up. At the apartment, we were still partying and waiting on the girls, but they were taking longer than expected. They called a couple of times, but it was getting late, and they still hadn't arrived. Then, I got a call from a wrong number. A girl with a sexy voice asking for someone named Ashley. I told her it was the wrong number, and we exchanged a few words before hanging up. It was about 2 a.m., and I thought, wow, she sounded pretty hot. So, I tried calling her back using *69, but the line was busy. I had that feature on my phone that notifies you when the line becomes available, so I waited about 20 minutes. Finally, the phone rang, and when I picked it up, I realized it was her number. I introduced myself and said I'd met her at a party a few weeks ago, but I'd lost her number. She didn't remember me, but when I mentioned she was with her friend Ashley, she instantly said that Ashley was her best friend. I asked what she was up to, and she told me she was hanging out with her fiancé, her sister, and her sister's boyfriend. I thought, damn, she has a fiancé. Guess that's the end of that. But I decided to be honest and explained how she had called me by mistake, and I just thought she had a sexy voice and wanted to hear it again. She apologized for the wrong number, and we hung up. About an hour later, she called me back. She said her sister had left, and her fiancé was passed out. We ended up talking for about an hour, and she told me she had to go because her fiancé was stirring. The next day, she called me again, and this time she was using a vibrator and wanted me to talk dirty to her. I went along with it, and she came hard. I told her she had me worked up and that we should meet up. We made plans for the next day at 1 p.m. I was nervous as hell, so I picked up a box of rubber on the way over. When I knocked on the door, I had no idea what she'd look like, but when she opened it, I was impressed. She was pretty damn hot and had just started working at Hooters. It felt a little weird at first. We were both nervous about the situation. She kept talking about her new job, so I asked if I could see her Hooters outfit. She went to the bedroom and changed into it. When she came back out, I was thoroughly impressed. Just then, her fiancé called. What do I do now? I went for the classic move, started working on her shoulders and kissing her neck from behind while she was still on the phone. She talked for several minutes while I kept touching her. Finally, she got off the phone, and that's when things really heated up. Story 9. In high school, my buddy and I were bored in our small town, so we decided to hang out in the Taco Bell parking lot, which was a spot a lot of people from our school would gather. While we were there, we ran into a female friend who happened to be alone and mentioned a party we could check out. We made our way to the party, and it turned out to be a pretty chill scene. The place was mostly guys, about 7 of them, and my buddy had already picked up his girlfriend. The only other girl there was the one who brought us. She was attractive, but honestly, I never really saw her in that way. I had just lost my V-card a few months before, so I wasn't expecting anything to happen at a party. But we walked in, 2 guys, 2 girls, and just hung out. The conversation eventually turned steamy, with most of the focus on the girl who brought us. She was pretty open about it, so things got pretty steamy at times. We weren't together, I just happened to be sitting next to her, but everyone assumed we were a couple. The guy who was hosting the party was fairly drunk and offered to give us a tour of the house. We followed him to the bedroom, and as we entered, he walked behind us and grabbed a box of rubbers. He then said, "You can use our bed, but if you use a rubber, Just tell my girlfriend so she doesn't think I cheated on her. I was confused as hell, but I looked at the girl who brought us, and she gave me a you down look. Before I knew it, we were banging while my buddy and his girlfriend were doing the same thing right next to us. Once we were done and left, it was like nothing had happened. No kissing, no emotional baggage. She was totally fine with the one-night stand, and so was I. We went back to being friends like it was just another day. Looking back, it was the perfect hookup in almost every way. No competition, since everyone thought we were together. The guy who threw the party was the perfect wingman, literally setting me up with no effort on my part. I wouldn't have even considered making a move if it hadn't just fallen into my lap. It was amazing. Story 10. Back in college, there was a girl in one of my classes I was really into and trying to get closer with. We got along well, but she was always busy and kind of flaky, so locking down plans with her outside of class was a challenge. We'd hung out once before to watch a movie at her place, but nothing happened, partly because her roommate was there the whole time, giving me the side eye. One day, I tried again to make plans, and she invited me to meet her at a campus bar that evening. Perfect. I thought it was just going to be the two of us, but when I walked in, I found her surrounded by at least 10 other women, including her roommate. It was clearly a girls' night out, and most of them didn't seem thrilled that I'd shown up. I immediately felt awkward and realized I'd come off as a total creep if I started hitting on her in front of everyone. So, I hung around the edges of the group, trying to make small talk with whoever would give me the time of day. Most of them ignored me. There was one woman in the group, though, who seemed a bit more detached from the others. She and I started chatting, and we ended up nerding out about A Song of Ice and Fire for a while. As the night went on, she mentioned she wanted to get away from the bar and go for a walk. I had access to a frat house near a lake, so I suggested we head there to hang out by the water. For context, this was the middle of winter in a cold northern state. Everyone was bundled up in jackets, and the lake was completely frozen. We walked down to the dock and sat there for a while, just talking and vibing. Nothing sexual, just a good conversation. Then, out of nowhere, she turned to me and said, "In case you didn't know, I have really nice jugs. They're DDs, want to see them?" I was caught off guard, but definitely not about to say no. She wasn't kidding. They were fantastic. Things escalated, and after a few minutes, we walked back to her apartment a few blocks away. It was a great night, and we ended up seeing each other for about a year after that. Later, I found out she'd been at the bar that night for the same reason I was. She was trying to sleep with the woman from my class. Turns out, we had that in common too. Eventually, we even had a threesome with her, so I guess we both got what we were originally after. Good times, indeed. Story 11. This happened during my second year at university. I had just finished my morning class and had a few hours free before my next one, so I decided to grab a cup of coffee at the campus cafeteria. It was around 10 a.m., and the place was pretty quiet, so finding a good spot by the window was easy. Then she walked in. I didn't know her that well at the time. She was a friend of a friend. We had met briefly at a party before, but hadn't really talked since. She looked around, saw me, and gave me a big smile. After grabbing a hot chocolate, she came over to my table and sat down. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed naturally. Before long, we were laughing and sharing stories, enjoying the time together. Somehow, the conversation shifted to a more playful and bold direction. It felt comfortable, with no awkwardness between us. Eventually, she paused, her tone turning more serious. "You know," she said, "it's been a while since I've had anything exciting happen." Without thinking, I said, "If I had any protection, I'd help you out." She looked at me with a smirk. Without skipping a beat, she pulled a familiar square packet from her purse. "I've got you covered," she replied, deadpan. I paused for a moment, trying to process her response. The look in her eyes told me she was serious. Before I knew it, I finished my coffee, grabbed her hand, and led her to the nearest empty lecture hall. The next half hour was an unexpected and thrilling experience. Story 12. I decided to head to a party one night and threw on my old, comfy Batman hoodie. It had always been one of my favorites, worn in and cozy. As soon as I got there, I noticed this girl who seemed to be a big fan of Batman. She mentioned how much she loved the superhero, and we hit it off right away. We spent a lot of the night chatting and laughing, and before I knew it, things started heating up between us. We ended up heading to a more private spot, and one thing led to another. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little groggy and looked around. That's when I realized my hoodie was nowhere to be found. I searched the room, but it seemed like it had vanished. I thought back to the night before, wondering if she had taken it, but I didn't really have any answers. All I knew was that my favorite hoodie was gone, and I was left with nothing but a strange mix of regret and curiosity. Story 13. I went to a motocross event called Redbud with a couple of buddies from school. It was a weekend-long event, and everyone camps right on the site, so the atmosphere was always buzzing with excitement. On the second night, I woke up in the middle of the night and made my way to the line of porta potties to use the bathroom. After finishing up, I flung the door open without thinking and hit something, causing it to ricochet back and smack me right in the forehead. I stepped out, rubbing my forehead, and noticed a girl crouched down by another porta potty, doing the same thing. We checked to make sure neither of us was hurt, and I apologized for the accident. She shrugged it off casually and joked, "Guess that's a sign I should have gone to bed earlier." Feeling a bit embarrassed, I awkwardly added, "My tent's pretty close if you want to, you know?" She let out a loud, amused sound and turned to walk away. Just as I was about to head back to my tent, she spun around, looked at me seriously, and said, "I have an RV," with a wave to indicate I should come over. Story 14. I was once living in an apartment building when my neighbor knocked on my door one afternoon, asking for help with a queen-sized mattress. She needed to carry it up 4 flights of narrow, cramped stairs. Standing in the doorway, I asked why she didn't just have the delivery guys do it, but she explained that they wanted to charge her $50, which she thought was unfair. She had tried to do it alone but quickly realized she couldn't manage on her own. She seemed frustrated and cute, so, naturally, I agreed to help. The process ended up being surprisingly close as we discovered midway that she was too weak to handle the mattress alone. We ended up squeezing around each other, switching positions, and coordinating our movements, her holding the door open while I pushed. Eventually, we got the mattress upstairs, both of us sweaty and breathing heavily. I had taken off my shirt, still wearing an undershirt, and she had stripped off her jeans since she'd just come from the gym. She invited me inside, and after we lifted the mattress onto the bed, she asked me to sit by the window, turning on the air conditioner. She grabbed 2 beers and sat next to me. We laughed, swapped stories about assembling IKEA furniture, and casually chatted. At one point, she rested her leg behind mine, her foot and shin brushing against my calf. I looked at her, trying to read the situation, and before I could say anything, we ended up kissing and, well, things escalated from there. Story 15. I had a female roommate who was just a friend, and we shared the same group of friends. One Saturday afternoon, I came home to find a stunning girl I'd never seen before lounging on my couch, watching TV. We chatted for a while, and later that night, she asked if she could crash at my place. I said sure. I went to grab some blankets for her to sleep on the couch, thinking there wasn't much of a vibe between us. But then she told me, "No, I'll just sleep in your bed." She stripped down to her inners and hopped into bed. There she was, this cute girl in her undies, and in one of the most awkward moments of my life, I climbed into bed fully clothed. Jeans, socks, the whole works, thinking I didn't want to make things weird. Then, I just fell asleep. A few hours later, I was woken up by her hands on me, and it finally clicked. Story 16. I was at a New Year's party, chatting with this gorgeous girl, totally out of my league, so I didn't even think about trying to make something happen. I was just absent-mindedly solving a Rubik's Cube. She noticed, commented on it, and I casually mentioned that I also had a 5x5 cube in my room that I could solve. She asked me to show her, so we headed to my room. Turns out, she wasn't really interested in watching me solve a Rubik's Cube after all. Story 17. I brought my sister's car to the mechanic and was asked to wait in the waiting area. I sat down and noticed a girl on a nearby couch. We started chatting about nothing in particular, just a pleasant conversation. Her name was called, I said bye, and she left. About 15 minutes later, I was paged to the manager's office. He gave me a strange smile and pointed to a phone with a blinking light. I was confused but picked it up. It was the girl from the waiting area. She said she couldn't just leave without asking, and if I wanted, would I like to go out with her sometime? I got her number. We went out a few times and eventually slept together. It fizzled out after a while, but I have to say, it was one of the boldest asks I've ever experienced. And, well, there was also a lot of banging. Story 18. I was at the gym working out one morning before work. Out of the maybe 10 people there, 8 were much older, and the only other person close to my age was a really attractive girl. I was already there when she showed up, and she took the treadmill next to mine, glancing at me every now and then. After finishing on the treadmill, I headed over to the weight machines, and she followed me. She wasn't really lifting any weights but kept looking at me and smiling every so often. This gym didn't have private shower rooms, just a bathroom with a shower. When it was time for me to shower, I grabbed my bag and, as I reached the door, I turned and smiled at her, making a subtle head gesture like, "You coming?" Then went in, leaving the door slightly open. I waited for a minute, almost convinced I'd made a fool of myself, when she suddenly opened the door and came in with her bag. We ended up having banging, and afterward, she washed my whole body for me. She wasn't at the gym in the mornings often, but every time she was, she'd watch me work out, then follow me into the shower for private time and to clean me up. We didn't talk much, but it was, hands down, the best relationship I ever had. Story 19. I was on vacation in a different state when I bumped into a girl who used to work for me back home. As soon as she spotted me, she rushed over and jumped into my arms. While I was still processing the fact that we were in the same place at the same time, she told me that she'd always thought I was cute and wanted to date me, but since I was her boss, she never said anything. Less than an hour later, we were in my hotel room. Honestly, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever met. I had no idea why she was so attracted to me, especially considering she was way out of my league. It turned out to be one of the best experiences I've ever had. Story 20. Villanova won March Madness, and I left my aunt and uncle's house to head to campus and join the celebration. After getting pretty drunk, I tried to climb a street lamp, but the police had coated it with some sticky substance to prevent exactly that. I fell off and landed near a pretty girl who helped me up. We started making out. I held her with my now sticky hands, and we ended up hooking up until about 5 a.m. I woke up way earlier than I'd wanted because, despite the fun, I actually went to a different college and had a 9 a.m. exam. I don't remember or never got her name, but in my mind, she's Sticky Buns. If you're out there, Sticky Buns, I hope you've been doing well. Hit me up if you see this. Story 21. A friend from the Navy was trying to get tickets to San Diego Comic-Con, and she needed a place to stay. I offered, of course, and mentioned that I wanted to go too. So, we both sat at our computers, spamming the queue to buy tickets. She got in, bought us both tickets, and when the time came, we headed out to the con. I paid her back, and we had an amazing time. At the time, she was friends with a well-known cosplayer, so we hung out with her for a bit. That cosplayer friend mentioned a friend of hers who was having a rough night at the masquerade and asked if we could meet up with her. My friend and I agreed, and we all met up. On Saturday night, the three of us were planning to hit up Nerd HQ for some drinks when the cosplayer friend received a text from her friend about a terrible time at the masquerade. The cosplayer didn't want to go get her, but I insisted we head back to pick her up. Let's be honest, I thought she was incredibly attractive. So, we all met up, joined a few others, and stayed out until around 3 a.m., chatting about WoW and other games we played. The chemistry between the hottie and I was undeniable, even with some guy trying to get in her way. Luckily, she wasn't interested in him at all. After everyone split up, she and I went to her place, where we ended up watching movies until early morning. Around 7 or 8 a.m., we both stopped pretending and went for it. Now, 5 years later, we're getting married and expecting a baby in a month. Story 22. I was at a bar I used to frequent when my buddy introduced me to two girls he'd been talking to while working there as a waiter. One was a blonde, the other a brunette. I introduced myself, and it turned out that the brunette was from the area where I grew up as a teenager before moving away. We started bonding over that, and after a couple more drinks, I learned she was in town celebrating her divorce. As it turns out, I not only went to school with her ex-husband, but we really couldn't stand each other. A few beers later, my friend got off work, and we all started getting pretty drunk before heading to his place with the two girls. His roommate wasn't there, so I went into his room with the brunette. We started making out against the wall, and I unhooked her bra as we kissed. She gasped. No one's ever done that before. I was too drunk and caught up in the moment to ask why, but when her bra hit the floor, I understood. What had seemed like DDs at the bar turned out to be A's, and let's just say things didn't go quite as expected. Still, we ended up hooking up, and I never saw her again after the next morning. Story 23. 2 years ago, I was living in a rough part of Hollywood, but I made the choice to stay at the high school in my hometown, about 7 miles away in northeast Los Angeles. Usually, I rode my bike to school, but it meant getting up super early just to eat and get ready for the hour-and-a-half ride up a bunch of hills, something I really didn't enjoy. Fortunately, the apartment I shared with my mom, I had just turned 18 at the time, literally a week after my birthday, was right across from the LA Metro Red Line station. So I would take the train when I had money or just didn't want to deal with being exhausted and sweaty. This is where the story picks up. Anyone who's used public transportation in a big city knows you're bound to run into some interesting people. By that point, I had become pretty accustomed to the characters that make the ride uncomfortable: homeless folks, mentally disabled individuals, vendors, etc. So I typically just tuned everything out, unless someone was genuinely friendly. And that's exactly what happened one day. I had just finished school, got off the Gold Line at Union Station, and was waiting for the train to take me home. As I came down the steps to the subway, I heard a woman yelling like a madwoman. I thought, oh great, another crazy person, and tried to stay away from whatever scene was going on. But for some reason, she noticed me and came over, asking if I could protect her from a woman she was arguing with, who was in a wheelchair. Being the kind of nervous, quiet person I am, I agreed, and we got on the train together. At first, I was suspicious, but those thoughts faded when I took a closer look at her. The odd thing about this woman was she didn't look like a typical homeless person. She was actually very pretty, a 50-year-old black woman, as she claimed, with lipstick, lovely eyes, a great smile, and beautiful hair. She also had one of those black metal mini carts that grandmas usually take to the market, which made me wonder why she wanted me, a skinny 18-year-old, to protect her. It didn't take long for me to figure out why when she asked me to go with her on the blue line and hinted that I was legal age to take home. It quickly became clear that my suspicions were right. This woman was absolutely out of her mind. From the blue line to the 2 buses we took to get her to her home in Huntington Park, she caused a scene, yelling at people for being too close to her, sitting on her things, and thrashing her cart at anyone who annoyed her. She didn't seem to care about anything, including starting fights. I was honestly worried she might get me into serious trouble. She also kept ranting about illegals, trying to get her to help them avoid being caught. By the time we got to her house, I was ready to leave at the drop of a hat, but she insisted I stay and fix her TV, which I did, thanks to my Mexican powers, as she called them. For a 50-year-old woman, though, she had a surprising amount of energy and eagerness. I ended up hooking up with her, and let me tell you, it was definitely not dirt cheap. Stupidly, I gave her my number when she asked, but as soon as I left, I literally bolted towards the blue line. I got lost for about an hour, wandering down unfamiliar streets with my stuff, trying to find the train or at least make it back to downtown. Eventually, I made it home, exhausted, hungry, and a bit rattled. But I couldn't deny there was some satisfaction in surviving the night. After credit scene, the next morning, she actually called me. I hung up immediately and blocked her number. I haven't heard from her or seen her since. Story 24. A few months ago, it was a Thursday night, and I decided to go to bed relatively early since I had a tough midterm the next day. My roommate, an exchange student from Belgium, had other plans, though. I woke up at 1:30 a.m. to the sound of him bringing in a large group of people, who then proceeded to keep the party going in my apartment. There must have been around 40 drunk college students, and I could hear them having a great time from my room. Unable to get back to sleep and having already told him to kick everyone out by 2:30, I threw on some sweats. I had been in my underwear, and went to grab a glass of water. I walked through the crowd of drunk Europeans to the kitchen, where a Swedish girl gave me a flirty, "Hey sexy," eyebrow raise. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I was tired and heading back to bed. Her English wasn't great, so she followed me back into my room, asking why I wasn't partying with the others. Next thing I knew, she was kissing me on my bed. I thought to myself, this is probably the only time a Swedish exchange student is going to fall into my lap like this, so I decided to go along with it. Story 25. I feel kind of bad sharing this now, but here goes. A buddy of mine, let's call him Kev, had been talking to this girl, we'll call her Jay, and convinced her to come visit our area for the day and night, even though she lived about an hour away. The plan was for her to hang out with him and head home the next day. Unfortunately for Kev, he got called into work unexpectedly that day, probably because someone quit the night before. Jay was due to arrive just as Kev's shift started, so he asked me to keep her company and show her around while he worked. Yeah, I'm sure you can guess where this is going. Less than 30 minutes after picking her up and bringing her to my place to hang out and smoke a little, we ended up getting pretty physical. I'm not going to make excuses. It takes two. I know, but come on. We went at it for a couple of hours until Kev called, saying he got off work early and asking where we were. When we met up, things got weird. Kev wanted to take her out to dinner and a movie, the original plan, but she suddenly insisted on going swimming with all three of us. I wasn't about to get into that awkward situation, so I came up with some weak excuse about needing to pick up my little brother. After that, she told Kev she was going to get gas and would meet him at the restaurant, but she ended up ditching him and going home early. Later, she found me on Facebook and tried to hook up a few times after, but I turned her down, feeling a bit guilty in hindsight, especially with the whole brotherly thing hanging over me. Story 26. It was my dad's huge 50th birthday party, like, huge. There must have been over 300 people at my parents' place for it. My best friend of 20 years, practically family, came in from out of town, and he brought his girlfriend, who, to be honest, nobody really liked. She invited an old colleague from a job she had when she lived an hour away, and this woman was stunning, like jaw-droppingly beautiful. She was a few years older than me, recently separated, with kids. We hit it off right away and spent the next couple of hours drinking and swapping life stories. Fast forward to a random moment, and suddenly we're making out in the middle of this massive party. We needed a place to continue, so I swiped my best friend's hotel room that he'd booked for the weekend and took her there for a few blissful hours. Meanwhile, my best friend and his girlfriend had to crash on the floor at my parents' house. I've never seen or heard from her again, but that experience gave me a lasting appreciation for older women I'll never lose. And it solidified that my best friend is the ultimate bro. Story 27. It wasn't anything wild, but it definitely took me by surprise and led to a couple of months of hooking up with a stunning girl. I was out with some friends, but honestly, I wasn't feeling it that night. I pushed myself to go out because I didn't want to waste the weekend, but I was tired and definitely not in the mood to party. We ended up at a club that's more local than touristy. I live in a big tourist spot in Mexico, and everyone else was going crazy, but I was over it. So, I said my goodbyes and stepped outside to get some air before heading home. As I'm standing there, looking like someone who needs a nap, I accidentally bump into this girl. I apologized, but she was chill about it and said she was actually glad I bumped into her because her friend had been eyeing me since I got there. Long story short, we all introduce ourselves, and the girl I bumped into finds some guy while her friend and I keep chatting. After about 30 minutes, they invite us to their place for drinks, which we agreed to since it was just a 10-minute walk. By the time we got to their place, it was pretty obvious that the girl I bumped into was way more into me than her friend, and I wasn't really vibing with the friend. So, when we were all hanging out, she and I ended up in the kitchen, where she kissed me. At that point, her friend didn't care and started flirting with the other guy. To cut a long story short, the girl I bumped into was staying in town for about 2 months, and we ended up becoming bang buddies. It was totally random, but she even made me breakfast the next morning, let me use her shower, where we also hooked up, and was into some wild stuff. Good memories. I wouldn't call it insane, since it was all outside the club, but it was definitely fun. Story 28. I added a girl on Facebook back in high school. We shared a bunch of classes over the years, but we never really hung out or talked much, either on Facebook or in person. It was more of a convenience thing. We figured it'd be useful for stuff like checking on homework or project updates. Fast forward about 5 years after graduation. She posted on Facebook about buying a TV, but said it wasn't going to work for her and that she wanted to sell it. My family and I had been looking for a new TV, and the price was good, so I reached out to see if I could grab it. The next day, after my college class, I drove over to her place. I didn't bother changing out of my white lab coat, and we met in front of her apartment complex before she led me upstairs. Her 3 roommates were in the living room watching TV, and she took me to her room. She showed me the TV, we chatted for a bit. I handed her the money, and I started dragging the TV out of the room as she closed the door behind me. Somehow, we ended up hooking up on her bed while her roommates were just a few rooms away, watching Lord of the Rings. Afterwards, she fell asleep, and I spent about an hour dragging the 50-inch TV out of her apartment. Her roommates were sitting down to dinner, giving me a mix of looks. Some seemed impressed, others grossed out. It was an awkward vibe, so I just hurried out of the apartment. When I got to my truck, I realized I had left my white lab coat hanging on one of her bedposts. I had to go back and knock on her door, asking one of her roommates to let me back in to grab it. Since then, we haven't really interacted much, except for a few messages on Messenger where she thanked me for taking the TV off her hands. Story 29. On New Year's Eve 1999, I invited this insanely attractive girl to a bonfire party at my friend's place. I never thought I had a shot with her, but somehow, she said yes. As we sat around the fire, people were debating what might happen if the world actually ended at midnight. I could see the wheels turning in her head. Around 11:45 p.m., she leaned in and whispered that we should go to the bathroom. Once inside, she told me that if the world really was about to end, she wanted to sleep with me first. She started by kneeling down and gave me a blowy right there, and then we moved to my friend's room to finish the night properly. It was incredible. Story 30. I went to a buddy's wedding solo down in Tulum and decided to take a break from all the wedding festivities by booking a solo scuba diving excursion. When I got to the dive shop, I met the guide and the rest of the group. That's where I met an Australian woman who was on a big family trip, fresh off a rough divorce. We hit it off instantly and grabbed a beer after the dive. At one point, she looked at me and basically said, "Let's do this. I have an early flight in the morning." So we did. It was amazing and totally unexpected. Looking back, I wish we had stayed in touch. She was an incredibly cool woman. Story 31. My doorbell rang unexpectedly, and when I opened it, there stood my ex, wearing nothing but a damp bathing suit. She told me she'd been swimming at her sister's place just a couple of minutes away and decided to drop by and say hi. It had been a while since we'd last spoken, so I was caught off guard. But before I could really process the situation, she stepped inside with a smirk. "I'm soaking wet," she said casually. Instinctively, I offered her a towel, but she just looked me in the eye and said, "Not that kind of wet." 2 minutes later, we were all over each other. It was fast, intense, and felt like something out of a movie. Afterward, she cleaned up, got dressed, and walked out the door like nothing had happened. No long goodbyes, no promises to keep in touch, just gone. That was 14 years ago, and I never heard from her again. Story 32. When I was 22, my family took a trip to Hawaii. Now that my siblings and I were adults, my parents wanted to do more grown-up activities, so one night, we ended up at a gay karaoke bar. Everyone was feeling pretty good after a few drinks when we met a group of Navy personnel stationed in Hawaii. It was mostly women, with just one guy in the mix. We all hit it off and spent the night hanging out together. The one guy in the group kept insisting that he and I do a karaoke duet. He also kept asking me to dance, and I did, assuming he was just having fun since, well, we were at a gay bar. In my slightly tipsy state, and with my parents right there, I never thought much of it or considered he might actually be flirting. By the end of the night, we all exchanged social media and went our separate ways. The next morning, I woke up to a message from him asking how long I'd be in town and if I wanted to meet up. My parents and sister had plans to go hiking, and my brother wanted to explore the city, so I figured, why not? I spent the day with him, and he took me to some great local spots. It was honestly a lot of fun. At one point, he drove us to a cliffside overlooking the ocean, and that's when he made his move. It felt like something straight out of a movie. He looked at me and said something about taking chances when you get them, then leaned in and kissed me. I kissed him back without hesitation. He ended up taking me back to his place, and we had some amazing time. Later, he told me I was only the second person he had ever slept with, and the first person he had ever given blowy to. We didn't keep in touch much after that. A few days later, I went home, and he got stationed in Miami, and life just carried on. But looking back, it was such an unexpected and beautiful experience, one I wouldn't trade for anything. Story 33. Years ago, my flight got canceled, leaving me stuck in a long line while the airline figured things out. Right in front of me was a woman way out of my league. But since we were both stranded and had nothing better to do, we struck up a conversation. We ended up chatting the entire time, making the wait a little less miserable. Eventually, the airline put us on a bus to a hotel and covered our stay for the night. When we got to the front desk, on a sudden wave of confidence, I asked for 2 keys, then casually offered one to her, fully expecting an immediate and humiliating rejection. But about half an hour later, there was a knock at my door. She was standing there. What followed was spontaneous, exciting, and something I'll never forget. It was a rare, fleeting moment of boldness that paid off, but one I don't think I'd ever have the nerve to try again. Story 34. I've always struggled with approaching women. Just the thought of it paralyzes me. My approach anxiety is completely out of control. One night at a bar, I spotted a girl I thought was cute but, as usual, couldn't bring myself to make a move. My friend, clearly fed up with my hesitation, decided to take matters into his own hands, literally. He shoved me so hard in her direction that I nearly lost my balance. With no choice but to go with it, I awkwardly said hello. Somehow it worked. That night, I got laid. Story 35. On Christmas Day, I went to my childhood best friend's family party with my mom. While there, I ran into his cousin for the first time in years, along with her friend from way back. We caught up for a bit and casually talked about maybe hanging out later that night. Sure enough, we ended up meeting at her place later, having a few beers and reminiscing. The only problem? It was a studio apartment, and her friend was staying there too. I wanted to make a move, but the situation felt a little awkward. Eventually, I decided to call it a night and headed home. Halfway through the Uber ride, I got a text. "We were hoping you'd stay with us." Without hesitation, I told the driver to turn around. My first 3 score was a Christmas miracle. Story 36. Almost 20 years ago, I went to prom with a group of couples, including my date's brother and his date. After the dance, I dropped off my date and her brother, leaving just me and his date in the car. As we drove, she laughed and said, "Well, that was awkward." They totally dong-blocked each other because neither of them wanted to at least kiss us in front of the other. I chuckled and replied, "You're right, we both missed out." Without missing a beat, she leaned in and kissed me, then proceeded to taste my flower on the way back to her place. Neither of us were actually dating our prom dates, and we barely knew each other at the time, But after that night, we ended up hooking up a few more times. Story 37. One of my proudest moments happened at the law firm where I work. We had a new secretary join the team, and she was definitely attractive. Everyone else was trying to flirt with her, but I kept it casual, just being friendly and making small talk when I'd see her in the mornings or after lunch. One day, she started giving me clear hints that she was interested in going for drinks. I was hesitant, though. I didn't want to risk anything by asking a colleague out, so I just played it cool. Eventually, she called me over to her desk. I thought she was just transferring someone, but instead, she asked how long I was going to play hard to get. Then, she invited me for drinks after work. We went, and that night, we ended up hooking up in her car. Story 38. It was the night before the college semester started. I was lying on the couch, trying to fall asleep and get ready for the next day. Suddenly, I heard the front door open and footsteps coming in. I thought it was my roommate, but then I remembered he had been in his room the whole time. Confused, I saw someone settle on the other couch. It took me a moment to realize it was a girl who worked with my roommate. I'd met her before, but never really spoken to her. I asked if she was okay and what she was doing here, thinking she came over to see my roommate, but she said nothing. Then, out of nowhere, she moved closer to me, and before I knew it, we started kissing. I stopped a couple of times, asking what was going on, but she just laughed it off in that flirty way girls do. We didn't go any further, but things definitely got physical. After she left, I spent the rest of the night trying to process everything that had just happened. Story 39. I was working as a mailman a few years ago when I was asked to fill in at another city for a few days because they were short on workers and behind on deliveries. They set up a hotel for me and a few coworkers I didn't know. After working all day, I had to catch the first train to the hotel, arriving around midnight. I was exhausted and just wanted to relax. When I checked in, the guy at the counter told me I'd have to share my room with another coworker. I wasn't expecting it, and it frustrated me at the time. I walked to my room, still irritated about the situation, and opened the door. To my surprise, a really nice girl greeted me. She was the coworker I'd be sharing the room with. We chatted for a bit, and we really hit it off. About 15 minutes later, I was lying in her bed. Looking back, it's funny how annoyed I was about not having a room to myself, because in the end, it wasn't so bad after all. Story 40. I had a close connection with a girl I was dating, and we went to a concert together. After having a bit too much to drink, we found ourselves in an emotional moment and ended up being intimate in a secluded spot near my parents' house. It was late, so there was little chance anyone would have seen us. The next day, she didn't bring it up at all. She had a pretty laid-back attitude about intimacy. Another time, I was stretching in my girlfriend's living room after a run in the heat, wearing just my shorts. Suddenly, she became very forward, and when I asked her later what had prompted it, she said it was because of what she had seen. We were in the middle of things when her sister and their friend walked in unexpectedly. It turns out that the sister was actually the identical twin of the girl in the first situation. It was an unexpected twist. To provide some more context, I'll explain the situation a bit more. Let's call the first twin Sue and the second twin Sally. Sue and I were both studying computer science and had several classes together. I was from a quiet suburb of Boston, and she came from a more urban area, so she was a lot more experienced and worldly than I was. She was beautiful, intelligent, funny, and we clicked really well. She introduced me to punk music, and we spent a lot of time together. I think I had feelings for her, and I sensed she might have felt the same, but she was involved with someone else. Eventually, I met Sally at Sue's place. Sally looked just like Sue, was also really cool, and was open to dating, so we started a relationship. It's possible I was transferring my feelings from Sue to Sally, though I'm not sure. A month or so into our relationship, we were caught unexpectedly by Sue and her friend, but they thought it was funny. After some time, Sally and I broke up, and I continued spending time with Sue. A few months later, we went to a concert together, had a few drinks, and ended up in a similar situation in a secluded spot near the sidewalk, where things escalated between us. That's the last time I saw either of them after I graduated from college. Story 41. I was working as an Uber driver in a popular tourist town, and one night I received a ride request around 2 a.m. When I arrived, I found a woman who was extremely intoxicated, possibly from alcohol or something else, and a guy handing her off to me. I'm not sure what had happened, but it seemed like she had been partying for her birthday and just got overly drunk. She was incredibly attractive, like a look-alike celebrity, and dressed up really well. At the time, I was a young 21-year-old with little experience, so her confidence and beauty made her seem like someone way out of my league. During the ride, She was acting erratically and kept insisting I ignore the directions and pull into a random parking lot. I was unsure about what was happening, but I parked and asked if I was dropping her off. Once I stopped, she suddenly jumped into my seat, trying to be physical with me, but I quickly pushed her away and told her to stop. I was in a very difficult situation because, as much as I might have been interested in someone like her, I knew it wasn't right to take advantage of her in her state. I ended up driving her to her apartment and helped her inside since she was too drunk to walk on her own. When we got to her door, she tried to kiss me and pull me inside, but I declined. It was also a bit awkward since her neighbors were outside, witnessing the whole situation. The next day, I checked in on her through Snapchat to make sure she was okay. I also mentioned that if she ever wanted to hang out when she wasn't intoxicated, I'd be open to it. However, she ended up blocking me, probably because of how embarrassing the situation had been. In the end, it was a very unexpected experience, and I'm proud of myself for not taking advantage of the situation despite how tempting it might have been. Morally, I knew it wouldn't have been right. Story 42. I had an online gaming buddy from across the country with whom I'd been in touch for almost a decade. Even as we both grew older and played games less often, we stayed in contact regularly. One day, we started talking about the idea of meeting up in person and realized that after all these years, we'd never actually tried to meet face-to-face. We decided to plan it out, and before I knew it, I had a plane ticket booked to meet him. The day arrived, and we met up. It was a great time. I also got to meet his wife, who was just as wonderful as he had described. I thought they were both attractive, and I could have sworn there was a bit of a flirtatious vibe between the three of us, but I brushed it off, figuring I was just overthinking things since I was single. Later that night, as I was getting ready to head back to my hotel, my friend mentioned something along the lines of, "I don't know if this is weird, but I got the feeling we kind of connected on a different level, and we were wondering if you'd be open to exploring that with us." To keep it simple, I was open to it, and the three of us spent the rest of the night together. It was definitely an unexpected turn of events, but it turned out to be one of the most memorable experiences of my life. Story 43. Not totally random, in that I expected something, but the overall situation surprised me. An older woman I knew from a previous job shared on social media that she had gone through a divorce. She posted some pictures, and she looked better than ever. Though she had always been attractive, I remembered her as someone who seemed reserved and not very forward. I reached out to her, and she suggested we meet up. I wasn't entirely sure if it was meant to be a date, but we decided to get together. We met at a bar and caught up. It was nice to reconnect, but there wasn't much flirting. We had always been friendly when we worked together. Afterward, I walked her to her car, and we shared a kiss. It was a bit of a surprise, but it felt natural. We said our goodbyes, and I didn't think too much of it at the time. The next day, I was at a friend's gathering, and she happened to be in town. I invited her to join us, and to my surprise, she seemed eager to hang out. During the time we spent together, she seemed comfortable and engaged, even sitting on my lap while we chatted. It got late, and since she lived quite far away, I offered her a place to stay. She agreed. Honestly, I was still a bit in disbelief. It felt like something out of a story, but I didn't want to get ahead of myself. We ended up in bed, but she was a bit hesitant when I tried to make things more physical. I respected her boundaries and was happy just being close and affectionate. But she surprised me again. After a bit, she took the initiative, and we shared an incredibly intimate experience. It was surreal in a way, like a fantasy I never expected to come true. It was a memorable moment, and wouldn't you know it, we're still together 6 years later. She's as thrilling to be with today as she was 6 years ago. Story 44. My dad's colleague needed help with his classic Corvette, as he was planning to pass it down to his family and wanted to get it started first. My dad asked me to assist. When I arrived at his house, I noticed a lot of cars in the driveway. I went to the door, and a group of women answered. They seemed excited, and I was a bit taken aback. I've heard people say I'm good-looking, but I never paid much attention to it. I explained why I was there, and one of them directed me to the barn where the men were. I met the owner, and after about 30 minutes, I had the car running. He was thrilled and invited me to go inside, clean up, grab a beer, and eat something. I went in and asked for the bathroom. A girl around my age quickly offered to show me. She led me down a few hallways to a bathroom at the back of the house. As I was washing my hands, I looked up in the mirror and noticed she had removed her shirt. She stepped into the bathroom and closed the door behind her. After we were done, she took my phone, sent me her address, and said I should head over to her place when I left. I ended up spending the rest of the weekend at her house. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.